Bam.
Hi, this is Shelley Herman, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Yes, yes, you are. And it's Friday. We're having a great time, and my Wi-Fi is misbehaving, but we're going to give this thing a shot anyhow right now. Shelley has written a fantastic book. You lived a crazy life during a crazy time at a crazy place in a crazy city, and I love it. I love, one thing I love to do is I love to watch the old TV shows on YouTube. It's great. You can watch like What's My Line. I love watching old Johnny Carson. And you lived this incredible life as being an NBC page, which meant you were helping everybody do everything while they did incredible things.
Well, you said they were crazy times. If you talk to any of the people I worked with, they would tell you it was probably the best time of their life. When I was at NBC in Burbank, which I started there on June 21st, 1976, the longest day, and the friends I made there are still my close friends to this day. In fact, I'm going to go see a Tina Turner show at the Pantages Theater with a couple of the pages tomorrow. It's just been a wonderful time in all our lives that can't be repeated, shouldn't be repeated. Um, Life goes on.
Yeah, yeah. It's is it possible still today to have that same experience if you're some 22-year-old kid living in Studio City or something? Can you repeat that same kind of excitement?
Well, the NBC New York office offers the same kind of experience that I had when I was working in Burbank. Sadly, the Burbank facility has closed. NBC was purchased by Universal, and instead of giving tours the way we did, the Universal tour operation has taken that over. But if somebody is interested in trying to become part of the Page program, which is basically it's an executive recruiting program, kind of your first foot in the door to get into show business. Uh, it's This is the 90th anniversary this year, by the way, of the Page program.
Hmm.
NBC has made it much easier for people to have that opportunity. Uh, the bad part is there's over 16,000 applications a year that they receive. And of that, about 2% of the people get in, which means it's easier to get into Harvard than to become an NBC page. And what they have you do is you fill out a form online at NBC, NBC Universal, NBCUI.com. Look for the Page program. And then they're going to have you send a 2-minute video showing them how you can be a perky little page and give tours around 30 Rock or usher television shows, uh, interact with the celebrities, interact with the executives at 30 Rock. And then if they like you, they will fly you at their expense to either New York or Los Angeles for an interview, put you up in a hotel, and meet you in person. So a lot more opportunities are out there for people rather than just living in LA or New York.
And we're talking about NBC. There must be the same thing for different areas. I mean, there's so many more studios than there were in the 70s too. I mean, maybe the studios were bigger back then, but the lot has expanded tremendously. Amazon has a presence there. Oprah has a presence at the lot. And I'm
But
just
it's
saying,
nothing like the NBC Page program because,
okay.
again, we were there to get our foot in the door to try to meet the executives, to try to work our way into the industry. Now, at these different studios, they hire companies to handle the audience services, to
Hmm.
take care of ushering the shows, distributing the tickets, and they don't have really any contact with any of the stars or any of the executives. But at these different companies, they do have internship programs that people can try to sign up for. But I still think the gold standard is the NBC Page program.
Okay. What's the when you are you in a pool of pages? Are you all waiting in the cafeteria, the commissary, and waiting to get called? I mean, how do you? I mean, what's your day-to-day life like back then?
At the time I was there were 100 men and women that were pages at NBC. By the way, it wasn't always men and women. It was only recently when I started that they allowed the women to usher the TV shows. Otherwise, the women were the guidettes and only gave
Hmm.
tours of the building in their white go-go boots and short dresses. So I got there at least at a good time.
Yeah.
And what they would do, they would schedule us. This poor woman, Dorothy, who all I can picture her is hunched over with a brown cigarette, looking at the schedule like it was on an architect's drawing board, trying to plan out how many people I need to give tours today, who needs to usher TV shows, who needs to take celebrities in limousines, who needs to fill in at the executive offices. It was mind-boggling. And those of us who were there had the Page Lounge that we could wait in. And we could, it almost seemed like on the old TV show Taxi when they would call out, Riga, you get a cab,
Riga.
And you go and go do the tour.
And then tours, some ushering, that kind of thing. What else fell in there? Was any just like a gopher role where anything goes? You're running a sandwich out to Betty White, who's sitting in there doing her Betty White show?
Well, we were NBC's ambassadors. And if talent needed something, we could certainly, if we couldn't get it, we'd find a way to get it. But when the celebrities were at the studios, most of them had their agents or managers or publicity people with them. So if there was personal needs like that could be taken care of, they would do that. But there was one instance where Courtney Conti, who became a really big executive with like the Carsey Warner Company and many, many others. He's just recently retired. He was working in the hallway on the Midnight Special, and a very gruff Jeff Wald, who was married to Helen Reddy, and she was the host of the Midnight Special at the time. And he said, there's a sandwich waiting for me at the gate. Go get it. And Courtney said, like, I can't leave my post here. I have to stay here. And Jeff Wald picked up the telephone and threw it at Courtney, but it was one of those old-fashioned landlines that had the curly phone on it, and it just kind of like bounced back and reverberated off the wall. And Courtney had Mr. Wald taken off the lot for doing that because that was, not good. So flash forward many years later, Courtney's now an executive working on the Roseanne show, and Jeff Wald is her manager. So Courtney went over to Jeff Wald and said, "Hi, do you remember me?" And Courtney explained the incident to him. And to his own admission, Jeff said, I was on cocaine. I was high. I was a horrible person back then. I'm not that person now. And they became friends and laughed about it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, right? Like that era, the drugs, I mean, Quaaludes, cocaine, everything. And I guess
not on my salary. I couldn't afford any of that.
But the people around that thing, I mean, it was a different time. I mean, there's plenty of drugs to go around now too, but it's a wild thing.
Yeah, I think the most trouble we could have gotten into back in the day is sitting back in the Page Lounge on a Saturday. If we got off work on time, we could watch the live Saturday Night Live going out over the air on the East Coast feed. So sometimes we'd go into the Page Lounge, and if somebody had a few extra bucks that week, maybe there'd be some beer or some wine or something like that. But we had to get rid of all the evidence very quickly because that was a big Page no-no to have booze on the premises.
Yeah. When I was young, I worked at Tower, and it was one of those jobs where it was just
the Tower on Sunset.
Well, no, not in LA. I worked in Sacramento where the mothership was, but I worked at a tower, and it was such a great job. It was so cool. There were so many people that came in that were cool. Whoever your local celebrities were, we had a lot of fighters and Sacramento Kings players that came through. But these folks would come around, and we would just hang out, and you would end up leaving work, or you would be done working, but you wouldn't leave work. You would just stay, because it was so much fun and all your friends were there and you just end up hanging out. So was it the same thing for you guys where like you get off and you're like, I'm just hanging out. I'm just having a great time.
We would do that. I mean, some of us had more than one job at the time, so we couldn't always hang out. I was also going to school at the time. Now they want you to have at least a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Arts degree before applying for the Page program. So I was doing that. I was doing internships at TV production companies to get credits while I was in college. But one of the reasons why the Pages would hang around afterward is if there was any food left over at the craft service table,
right?
We could get like maybe a free dinner out of the deal.
Yeah, craft services. And then would you ever sneak any food? Like if if there was any food in the back of Tower, it was going to get eaten. There was never any leftovers because we were all so poor, right? Because we didn't make any. This is in the '80s, but still, you were making, I don't know, $3.40 an hour. I mean, it was no money at all.
Ooh. No, I'll tell you, there's a story, and it might be apocryphal, but it's one that we used to tell on the tour about never eating any food that you find backstage unless it is on the craft service table, which is the production company hires someone to cater the food. And it could be anything from chips and dip to like really nice stuff, with a little Bunsen burner under it. So the story goes that Suzanne Summers, before she became super famous from Three's Company, she used to come on the show and she would be bouncy and pretty and blonde. And Johnny liked to have that on the show. And she came up with something about put cucumbers over your eyes and here we'll put your feet in Jello and you'll relax. And it was a great segment. So Jack Grant, who was the head prop master, gets the cucumber, gets the Jello, takes it backstage. And by the time the show was over, it had all been eaten.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, icky. Yeah. But we really didn't have to sneak things. I mean, it was a pretty kumbaya kind of environment there. And as much as you'd think people would be backstabbing and trying to claw their way to the top, we were all really helpful with one another. I mean, there's one instance where, and it kind of backfired on me, but there was a chance to interview for a job with somebody to be like a low-level executive. And one of the pages was actually dating this guy. And I went to her and said, is it okay with you if I interview for this job? Because if you want to interview for it, I'll step back. I won't do it. So she goes, no, I'm not interested in a career path that way. You go interview. And I went in there and he immediately said, if you sleep with me, you can have the job. And I got all my feminist righteous indignation riled up. And I just said, but you're dating my friend and I would never sleep with you to get this job. I wouldn't sleep with anyone. And I'm going to go tell her what you said. So came back from the interview. She came over to me and she said, how'd it go? And I told her what he had said. And she looked at me. And I never talked to her again. She totally iced me out. And I thought I was just doing the girl code, telling her like, hey, you're investing your heart with a schmuck. And then as it turns out, what I didn't know is that she had actually moved in with him already. And she'd only been living with him for 2 weeks. And the idea of breaking up so soon was just too devastating for her. But it's a girl I really liked working with. And I really wished I could still have been friends with her, but I blew it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, did you? Or did she blow it? That's These are the tough things when you're young and you don't know what's the right answer there. You do the right thing. And,
I'd want somebody to tell me. So that's how I
want to. Yeah, if I was you, I would have done the same thing. I would say, this may not work out well for me, but I have to do this. I would want someone to tell me as well. Yeah.
And he was a player, and it wasn't just me. And no, they did not wind up getting married and living happily ever after. So
right. And if it wasn't you, it would be the next one. So The and that's a thing in any industry, but especially in that industry, that is a way to advance, and that is unfortunately a byproduct of that industry. But let's not go down that road because there are so many other fun things to talk about.
Do you want a happy executive story?
Yes, please.
Take the tinge off of that a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So, when you're 20 years old and you're given the keys to the kingdom at NBC, you figure like, well, I know everything. I can do anything I want. So I was desperate to meet Dick Ebersol, who at the time was in charge of late night television. And he and Lorne Michaels got together and created Saturday Night Live. Originally, they used to just have old reruns of The Tonight Show that were on Saturday night. And when Johnny renegotiated his contract, he wanted to have those reruns available to run during his vacation time. So they had a hole at Saturday night. So they figured, well, let's try this show. So suddenly Dick Ebersol was like the biggest executive on the lot. and he would fly between LA and New York. And I was trying desperately to get an appointment with him because I figured the minute he'd meet me, of course, my career would take off and I'd be rich and famous and live happily ever after, because that's how a 20-year-old thinks. So I called the office, could not get through. And then I'm driving home one night and it was raining. I remember this so clearly. And I'm listening to KABC Talk Radio. And they said, our next guest is Dick Ebersol. And I'm on the freeway and I'm like, and I get off the freeway and I get off the exit and I go to a payphone and I had a fistful of quarters and I just start jamming them in the payphone, got through and said to the call screener something innocuous like, I want to know what John Belushi's like. And they put me through and they go, and the next caller for Dick Ebersol, what's your question? And I said, hi, my name is Shelley Herman. I'm a page at NBC in Burbank, and I've been trying to get an appointment with your office, but your secretary won't make an appointment. So could you promise me on the air right now that you'll make an appointment and see me? And he said, yes.
Dang. You go, girl. That's awesome.
So, when you talk about how things are in different industries, I talk about putting on my Lucy Ricardo thinking cap. If you're really prepared to meet someone who could help you on the next rung of the ladder, without being a nudge about it, make people want to see you.
Yeah.
Don't force yourself on them. Don't be that person. Don't make them get a restraining order, but present yourself in such a way that they want to meet you.
Yeah. Have that extra gear that says, hey, I'm unstoppable. And if you let me work with you, I'll be unstoppable for you. There is too much, but that's not too much. That's implacable, right? Implacable is good. Infatuated is bad.
Yeah.
One of the things that I recall from watching TV, maybe just a shade after that, was that on occasion, the pages, whether it was on Carson or especially on Letterman, the pages would make it into the programming, even if it was just you were in the shot or, sometimes interacted with. Was that something that was at all like a target for you guys at all? Or was that just like dumb luck if that happened?
It was grabbing the brass ring working at NBC to be selected. As my book cover shows, I did get to be one of the pages who did a bit that Johnny had called Stump the Band. And I qualify all of this because there's a whole generation of people that don't know who Johnny Carson is. And, you say to them, host of The Tonight Show, Jimmy Fallon, Jay Leno, they don't know who Johnny Carson was and how since October 1962, he was on the air basically as America's nightlight. Everybody watched Johnny before they went to bed at night. It was amazing. So when a guest got stuck in traffic, which imagine that happening in California. And they weren't, because they taped The Tonight Show. They started taping it at 5:30 and they would go straight through. Originally it was a 90-minute show and then it got cut back to a 60-minute format. So if it didn't look like the celebrity was going to be there, they would pick the page who had the most seniority, who was assigned to work the show that night. And my number came up and I was thrilled. At the same time, I was also heartbroken because my friend Dinah Bryant was also in contention for it. I think it was basically a coin toss at that point, and I won. So it was really fun too, because they tell you like, okay, here we are, go to makeup, and they powder your face down and put makeup on you and stuff. And the guy that did it was a guy named Harry Blake. And I remember as a kid seeing Harry Blake's name on the credits on Laugh-In. And here it's like, here I am in a makeup chair and Harry Blake's doing me. Wow. And Ed McMahon sitting next to me getting his makeup done. Johnny always had a private little area where he had his makeup done. And they give you the envelopes for Stump the Band, which was a game with the audience where an audience member would come up with a silly song and they do a little bit with it. And then Johnny eventually would have me hand an envelope to him, and it would have dinner for two someplace or tickets to Disneyland. But it was a real fun time killer, and it gave Johnny a wonderful opportunity to ad lib with the audiences, which he was the best at doing.
Yes. I didn't realize that was tied to traffic, which makes perfect sense now as an adult. It was just always very exciting when it happened. It was like, oh, great, they're going to do this part of it. I loved those things.
Well, it was fun too because the pages would stand off camera when one of us was on, and especially with my friend Lisa. And I stood down there and I would point. I go this way, go up that way. No, and that way we'd get our faces on camera so our families back home would see us. And this was before videotape machines, so they only had one chance to catch it unless it was going to rerun. And I was very fortunate that many years later, I was able to get a copy of my Stump the Band. Johnny Carson's nephews, Jeff and John, run his Carson Enterprises now, and they've been extremely generous, not only with giving me permission to use that picture on the cover of my book, but also giving me clips and helping some of the other pages get their old clips too from when they were on.
When I got your media pack, I used a picture of you with Chuck Barris on the Gong Show because it's just such a great thing to that show. No way that show lives on network TV today. It's ridiculous, but there you are.
They tried to do it.
Didn't work anymore.
Had Mike Myers dress up in some goofy makeup as being like joking the joke of the host. But when I'll back that up a little bit too. I had been a contestant on the Dating Game in 1972 and 1973. The first trip I won was to San Diego, which is like 2 hours from here. And the other one was a trip to the Bahamas. And I turned to the guy that I had picked to be my date. And I said, where are the Bahamas? I had no idea where I was going. So I got to meet the Chuck Barris people so that years later, when I was a page, Chuck saw me there. We're both from Philadelphia originally. He kind of like took a liking to me like a kid sister. I mean, he was just the best. Mm-hmm. And one day I'm giving a tour and somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I'm taking over your tour. Chuck Barris needs to see you. And I was like, oh gosh, thinking there was some kind of trouble or something. And he brought me backstage and he said, stand here. When the curtain opens, you'll know what to do. And I'm like, huh, what, huh? And I walked out with several other girls and Chuck gave an introduction about, I want you to meet the ladies of NBC. Ladies, introduce yourselves. And then we all shook hands with each other like we were introducing ourselves to each other. And that was my 15 seconds of fame with that. And it's funny because I dated somebody from the Chuck Barris staff. I never really dated any of the Dating Game guys that I ever won on the show.
Yeah, the Dating Game thing. How was that whole situation? Was that was completely legit? Like you didn't know who you were going to get a date with, and you actually go on the date with the person?
Totally legit, and especially because I was 17 the first time, 18 the second time, and if you were a female, you had to have a female chaperone with you for insurance purposes. And the first woman that was my chaperone, she looked like Cher. She was gorgeous. And anywhere we went, the men were just falling all over her. I mean, she was great. The second one I got was somebody's grandma. And she liked to drink gin. And we were staying at Paradise Island in the Bahamas. And she snored horribly because she had to share the room with me.
Right.
And I went out on the balcony to see if I could sleep. And there was like thunder and lightning. And then I eventually took the pillows off the bed and I put them in the closet and I closed the closet door. And that's the only way I could sleep while I was there. And then the guy that I won, he just took off and he had his own great time. And I had a fun time too. I learned to scuba dive, made friends with people that were also tourists there. And we were exchanging Christmas cards for many, many decades with one another.
But you and the dates never really worked out with you guys at all, and there was no like connection in any way.
I think one of the guys that I won never thought he'd met the right woman to date, if you get my drift.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other guy, no, we went to we went on the trip and just had a lovely time.
Yeah. That's funny.
And ate a bunch of free food.
And was there any money in that? Like, did you get like, hey, if we're coming on the show, no matter what, you're going to get, steaks at Tony Roma's or something like that?
When I did the show, I wasn't a member of the Screen Actors Guild yet. But if you were, you got a minimum fee. It was like $400. So that's why you'd see a lot of people on the show that John Ritter, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Andy Kaufman, Phyllis Diller, Adam West, lots of celebrities. They would do it and they'd get the money. Me, I got a watch, ship and shore blouses, and a bicycle.
Hey, whatever. It's something.
I still have the bicycle and the watch.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So back to Dick Ebersol, because you get this meeting with him. How did that go? And what did that do for your career?
I finally get in to see Dick, and he said, where do you see yourself in the future? And I said, well, I would very much like to work closely with you, and I would like to be able to continue your vision once you retire from NBC. And I'm looking forward to a great working relationship. And he says, well, the first thing you have to do is leave NBC. And I was like, what? I just got here. What do you mean leave? And he said, and I guess this is true at all corporations, that they will value you more if you have the outside experience than if you've always just been a company man or woman. Mm. So I had opportunities to leave NBC, and it seemed like fate made me stay a little bit longer than I thought I would stay. Mm-hmm. I had this wonderful thing that happened where Lisa, who I mentioned earlier, she wanted to go audition at the Comedy Store to be part of an ensemble group called the Comedy Store Players. And she said, come with me, I'm scared. And I went, okay, I'll go, And Robin Williams was one of the people who was there. And Lisa and I knew Robin because he had done a new version of Laugh-In that bombed horribly. But he was always very nice to us and very generous and kind, not a lech or anything like that at all. So with Robin there, I kind of felt comfortable. So Lisa gets up and does her little audition. And then Robin kind of looks at me with like a little twinkle in his eye. And he's like, come on. So I got up on stage and did a little some and, didn't think much of it. Well, the next day I get a call saying, congratulations, you've been approved to be in the Comedy Store Players. And Lisa didn't. And I felt really bad. Yeah. And I thought, well, is this what Dick Ebersol talked about? Is this the thing? Is this when I leave now? So, and the idea of leaving was daunting, but okay, if this is my moment, I'll do it. And I went over to a friend's house to talk about it, and we were playing ping pong, and I fell and I broke my leg. So the whole thing, break a leg being good luck, kind of was sort of bad luck. Yeah. Because I needed to work. I needed to be able to have my insurance. They put me at a desk job, so I didn't have to give tours for a couple of months. And I never did do that. But the good part of that story is my sweet page friend, George Glovna, knew how much I loved Harry Chapin. And every summer I would see Harry Chapin at the Greek Theater. And I turned to George and I said, I guess there goes my summer. I can't be on crutches and everything going to see Harry. And he'd arranged to get us front row seats at the Greek Theater. Wow. And I sat there with my leg up, watching the whole show. George got to sing All My Life's a Circle at the end of it. So it was a good night for him. And then the next night, I look on the Tonight Show and Harry's going to be a guest. So I called George and I said, oh my gosh, Harry's going to be on the Tonight Show. We have to tell him we were at the show last night and how much we loved him. So we go backstage, and before I could even say a word, Harry looked at my leg and said, you were at my concert last night.
Wow. Yeah. Did he sign your cast?
No, I didn't get that. No, but what I did do, wait a minute, I'll show you this. Wait a minute. Here we go. I was wearing this shirt at the time. Let's see if I can get it in. And I was wearing this shirt underneath my white page blouse. So like Superman, I ripped open my white blouse and showed him this orange shirt. So that worked out real cool.
That's great. So you have this adventure of a lifetime being a page, and then you do stay at NBC longer, partly because you break your leg. But when did your moment come to leave NBC?
It was starting to get to be a long time, and they were kind of insinuating I should leave.
Hmm.
And I met a woman who was working in the story department. And I was very despondent because I'd gone to Cal State Northridge, and one of the classes I took was shorthand. And after the second day, I can't do this. This is ridiculous. Why don't they just audio tape everything? Why am I doing this? And I was sitting at the desk and I was crying. And she said, "What's happening?" And I was like, "I'm never going to be an executive. I can't learn shorthand. I can't do anything." And she gave me really good career advice when she said, "If you don't want to do something for a living, never learn how to do it." And I befriended her. And then it turned out she was dating one of the vice presidents at NBC. And she said, "How about if I put in a word for you? You go be his secretary." Not that I was a good secretary, but I could keep an eye on him. And if he was cheating on her, I could tell her. So I worked with him, worked with another VP, and then we went to work at Lorimar Television, which at the time they were doing Dallas and all those really great shows. And that's when I left NBC.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So let's back up a little bit, because that's the late 70s, early 80s for Dallas. And yeah, that was a magic time for that network. They were really doing great things. Did you feel you were close enough to the creative process? Did you care about that? I mean, we sort of now look back at, like, saying being a secretary, but you are part of the whole process. You're helping this person do the big things. How did you feel about that?
I really liked when I would offer an opinion and it would be valid about something.
Right.
But where I found the most gratification career-wise,
Hmm.
get ready to put your clutch in and shift gears, because I started working in game shows.
Nice.
And at the time, there weren't very many women who were doing these kind of jobs, and I was working alongside the men as a writer and creator that way. And nothing gave me more joy than if I did something or wrote a joke or came up with and they, like, right away congratulated me. I loved doing that. And I learned so much about TV production working on the first game show I did was called The Liars Club, that Alan Ludden hosted. And to see how all of the different elements that go into making a show, that was like better than grad school for me. And I've subsequently worked on a whole lot of other game shows. And now, thankfully, there are more women in those roles as writers and producers. We need women to start creating content,
Hmm.
and I'm willing to be one of them.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And you're right. Like, it takes time to build these things. We want it to have happened right away, but the market is also has to know that there is a marketplace for these ideas. Of course, women can crack jokes and produce shows, but someone has to bet the money on it, right? And so these things have to grow at the pace that they grow at. So it's great that you got a chance to pioneer it in some ways.
But also the women have to know they can do it too.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
I didn't see a lot of other women doing non-traditional roles. I mean, Chuck Barris letting us all on the Gong Show that time, it was good to see there were women that were scenery painters, that were audio people. That was like a really cool thing that he did for that. But my thing with game shows is, as a little girl, I would see Arlene Francis or Kitty Carlisle or Peggy Cass or Betsy Palmer, and they'd be on these quiz show panel shows. And not only did they look pretty with their diamonds and their furs, but they were as smart as the guys. And they were guessing and on the same kind of level playing field and cracking jokes and being witty and urbane. And that was another thing you didn't see on television. You'd see, Donna Reed or Leave It to Beaver, and the women didn't have roles outside the home.
Yeah. But on game shows like Match Game, everybody was having a great time on Match Game, and on Hollywood Squares. We've had John Davidson on the show, and come on, I mean, everybody was cutting it up and doing a great job. You never even thought about it like, hey, there's women up there. It was just like, there's, whoever it's going to be, there were so many women that were up there. And also gay personalities. Way back then, it was like there's Paul Lynde, there's Jim Bullock. It was very normal and not in any way shocking to see
Well, and
women.
also the other group that gets discriminated against are the elderly. And you would
Mm,
see like a Cliff Arquette up there,
you sure would. Yeah.
or Cesar Romero or something like that, and you'd see people with white hair, and they were up there doing the jokes and keeping up with the kids. I'll tell you one thing with when I first got to NBC, I was standing in the hallway where Hollywood Squares was taping, and Vincent Price walked by, and as a little girl, I saw him play Captain Hook in Peter Pan, and I went over to him and introduced myself. And I said, I just want you to know that you just scared the heck out of me when I was a kid. And he said, good, then I was doing my job.
Did you get starstruck? I mean, fully starstruck. Like, okay, you got certain people you love them, but like when you're like, you no longer can function. Did that happen to you at all?
Twice.
Okay.
Once, John Wayne.
Okay.
I mean, he was so kind to everyone on the tour. He was doing a Bob Hope special, and he and Bob Hope and a couple other, Milton Berle types came out, but John Wayne stopped and he shook everybody's hand, and he was so gracious. I just shut up. I wasn't going to ruin that moment. And the other one, I was standing in the hallway and I saw this leg coming down the hallway. And I looked, it was this green chiffon long gown, and this leg was sticking out. And as this woman walked closer and closer, I looked up and up and up, and it was Lucille Ball.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
Yeah. And
I was going to ask about Lucy Ball because, we've lost track of how giant she was.
Oh, yeah. It was, that's just another one of those where I just didn't want to say something stupid or be stupid. I would just that was it. I'm humming. I did meet, and I wasn't at all intimidated, was James Stewart.
Sure.
And on my website at mypeepcocktail.com, there's a picture that I have where whenever a guest would come to the Tonight Show, the pages would be there to greet them in case they had a garment bag to carry or books or whatever they had. And James Stewart's limo driver dropped him off, and he had a Polaroid camera, and he said, "Do you mind taking a picture of Mr. Stewart and me together?" Absolutely. And then Jimmy Stewart said, "Oh, why don't you have the little lady come over here and I'll take a picture with her too?" I mean, how nice was that? The scary part after that was maybe 5 hours after that picture was taken, I got rushed to the hospital, and I didn't know it, but I had hepatitis.
Oh, you almost killed a legend.
Almost. Oops.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. It's such a neat thing because you are bumping up against all of these people, but they are also in a work setting, and you're in a work setting. There is time for a little bit of levity or a little bit of popping that, the fourth wall in your guys' worlds, but you are both doing your professional jobs. There's a very fine line there, isn't there?
And sometimes I would cross it. There's an instance where I was like, I'm either going to get fired for this or it's going to be okay. And I was willing to be fired for it. Redd Foxx was taping Sanford and Son at NBC Burbank. And he was one of those celebrities that was kind of treated like an eggshell. He was very delicate. He would get very volatile sometimes. And nobody really interacted with him. He just basically, if you watch Sanford and Son, he would do the show. He'd sit in a chair and he would read cue cards. He never rehearsed. But the show was a hit, so they let him do it however he wanted to. He had a good luck charm, and her name was Sadie O'Sullivan. And Sadie would take several buses to come over to NBC Burbank and sit in the audience for Hollywood Squares and Sanford and Son. And every once in a while, Red would slip her like $100. He was really good that way. And one day Sadie said, "What's all the commotion going on next door?" And I said, "Well, Frank Sinatra is doing the Tonight Show." And she said, "Well, you know, Frank bailed me out of jail once." And I said, "Oh, Sadie, do tell." And it seems that there was a rally across the street from her apartment of American Nazi Party people. And Sadie, she had married an O'Sullivan, but she was a Jewish woman, and she just could not stand the idea of the Nazis marching across the street. So she went over and hit a Nazi with her purse. And she was promptly arrested. And while she was in the holding cell, one of the policemen came and said, "Okay, Sadie, you're free to go." And she says, "What do you mean free to go? Nobody knows I'm here." And she got a telegram that said, "Way to go, Sadie. Love, Francis Albert." And Frank Sinatra heard that she was in jail. So she says, "I never had a chance to thank Frank." So, okay. So a little page girl knocks on Redd Foxx's dressing room door minutes before he's ready to start taping Sanford and Son. He wasn't expecting to see me, that's for sure. And I'd said to him, "Do you know Frank Sinatra?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you like Frank Sinatra?" He said, "Yeah." And I told him the Sadie story. He held up taping of the show, took Sadie next door to the Tonight Show, introduced her to Frank so Sadie could thank him. Isn't that cool?
That is the coolest thing. That is super cool. I am so glad you did that. And I'm glad you got away with it. I'm glad the NBC didn't fire you. These are the things, the calls that you have to make. You know, it didn't work out for your girlfriend and you, but I'm glad it worked out for you and that Nazi bashing lady. That's great.
Yes.
Man. That's awesome. That's awesome. And how did the story go down? And that's got to be online somewhere, right? Or like, did they do it on live on the Johnny Carson show, or was it behind the scenes?
No, it was just backstage. But it was interesting that all of us pages have our stories. Yeah. And we sit around and tell them over and over again, and our poor spouses and friends have heard them time after time. And it really wasn't until the pandemic hit and we got on Zoom and started finding some of our other friends that had moved out of the California area that we started hearing more of these stories. And somebody kept saying, "Somebody ought to write a book. Somebody ought to write a book." So it's like, well, I'm not doing anything. Let me give it a try.
Right.
And that's how we learned all these wonderful stories from people. I mean, some are pretty tragic and a little sad at times, but it was our experience. And it's just not that way anymore. I mean, we didn't really even have much security back in NBC back then. We pages, when Johnny would do the monologue, we would stand with our backs toward Johnny to see if anybody was going to run out of the audience or had a weapon or anything like that. But you know, now there's metal detectors, and it's like you're going to, you know, a concert or something where they look in your purses and everything. And we wouldn't have had the same access to people as they don't have the same access that we did. It was fun.
Yeah. So your book is less memoir and it's more like page memoir. It's a combination of all of these stories, right?
Oh, well, all those stories, but also I think there's kind of a thread that runs through it about how we graduated college. Mm-hmm. Now what? How do we figure out what to do once we've learned what to do and what not to do in a work situation, and how to do that out in the real world? And a lot of it had, for me, I didn't know anybody in showbiz. I just was somebody who just asked and met people and discovered things. I mean, being on the dating game at 17, you know, what parent lets their kid do that? It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I would think that I learned more what not to do when I was at NBC than what to do.
Yeah. I mean, that is that's a way to learn, right? Was there a spot or a place or a show or a thing that you wanted to do that you just couldn't quite? You know, there's always things you're like, I wish I could have gone that way, but it didn't work out for me, and you know, it just doesn't go that way. But was there a path you would have liked to have tried to take?
Not at NBC, because once I was there, I realized I didn't want to be in high heels and stockings and a skirt and have to go to work all the time and listened to people that were executives talking all the time. I really wanted a more creative route to take in developing shows and occasionally acting on shows. I mean, it was really fun because I had left NBC and met a friend through a friend and wound up doing TV's bloopers and practical jokes. And I played a practical joke on Billy D. Williams.
Did you really?
Yeah. So that was cool because it was like, oh, my first credit on NBC. That was so I liked that. So I took that experience and took it elsewhere. There's another time when I was backstage at the Tonight Show and I saw this guy and he looked kind of underdressed and he had a cane and he was leaning up against the wall. And I said, can I get you a chair? And he goes, no. My client is on the Tonight Show right now. And she wants to go to Disneyland afterward. I went, well, who's your client? And he said, Christy McNichol. And I said, well, did you call ahead to Disneyland to make any special arrangements? Because Space Mountain had just opened and she just wanted to go on that one ride. Mm-hmm. So he said, no. So I took pity on this poor soul. And I got on the phone and got the head of Disneyland security on the phone and basically said, you should have security greet the limousine when they arrive or there'll be pandemonium. I'm just warning you ahead of time. And sure enough, I said, when you arrive at Disneyland, ask for this person, you'll be given VIP treatment. And the guy says to me, I owe you a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne. And I said, well, I don't drink. Don't bother. It's fine. Just have a good life. I didn't realize it, but this guy was a very, very famous personal manager named Jay Bernstein.
Wow.
And Jay eventually, Farrah Fawcett was his client. I mean, just Linda Evans, Suzanne Summers, all of these magnificent women. And I didn't realize he was a big shot. I just thought I was just helping out some guy and playing on the phones. So many years later, I was out of a job. I called the number that he'd given me on his card, and he totally remembered me. And he says, I want you to come work for me. So that's how I got my job working for Jay.
And what did you do for Jay?
I was what they call a D girl. It was a development girl. Mm-hmm. And I would read scripts, try to find properties, not only that Jay could produce, but that might be right for some of his talent. And gosh, he had a big array of talent back then. And that was another thing. Kind of, I would listen on the phones when he was talking to people and learning how to cajole people and how to just kind of push at the right time. It was a very long 9 months of working with him, but I learned more in those 9 months than I learned in 5 years anywhere else.
Yeah, I can see that. And it's incredible. You know, I was thinking about your Christy McNichol story. If you tried to call the head of security of Disneyland today, good luck. You would never get anybody ever. You would never get them. You wouldn't be able to set yourself up in that.
What's even fun about this is I ran into Chris McNichol about maybe a month ago, and the book had just come out. And I looked at her and I was like, oh my God, she's in my book. And I said to her, do you remember going to Disneyland? And she goes, yeah, that was so great. I went, I did that. And I'm going to see Chris. I'm doing an autograph book signing show on June 30th and July 1st in Burbank, California at the Marriott. And Chris is one of the celebrities who's going to be signing autographs there. So I'm going to see her there and I'm going to give her a copy of my book.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, everybody check it out. So there's the link to the book down below. It's in the remarks. If you guys are on YouTube or Facebook, you can see it on the Break It Down show page. And I want everybody to, this is what I always recommend. You guys know this, buddy read. So buy one for you, buy one for your special someone or your friend. And look, this is going to be, normally like we have all these heavy reading books because I'm always bringing on all these scholars and everything. But this is going to be fun. And it's going to be, this is going to be, this is going to be stories about Christy McNichol and about Lucille Ball and all, I was going to say this to you. It's amazing that Doc Severinsen is still alive. I don't know what kind of shape he's in or anything, but these histories, they're still alive. Lucille Ball was gone.
Did you see the American Masters thing about Doc Severinsen that was on PBS?
No, I haven't seen it. I didn't know they did one on him. I've got to watch it.
See if it's on YouTube. Uh, at the time, and I think I saw it was during the pandemic, so it's within the last year or two, he had just retired.
Wow.
And he was in his early 90s, and he was still playing with bands all over the country.
Amazing.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is, here's this guy, and he's in his 90s, like you said, and you know, he did this, and I don't know when he started with the show, but he was there for a long time,
Well,
and
there was
that was a long time ago.
Skitch Henderson was the music director before he was.
Right.
And then if
Yeah.
Doc wasn't there, there'd be Tommy Newsom.
Right.
And then if Tommy wasn't available, there was a man named Shelley Cohen. And it turns out Shelley Cohen he and Johnny are the only two people that stayed with Johnny Carson's version of The Tonight Show the whole time Johnny was hosting.
Wow.
Oh, and Ed.
And Ed. Right. 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 So NBC had so many shows, Chips, Emergency, all these different shows that were going on. Did you bump into any kind of anything with that at all? Like were you doing tours and go in like, oh, they're in production, everybody be quiet, that kind of thing?
Well, our facility was a videotape facility, so some of the film shows like Chips or Little House and stuff were done on location elsewhere. But
Right.
when Eric Estrada was promoting Chips for the first time, I picked him up in a limousine to take him to the Sheraton Universal Hotel, which Johnny used to call the Sheraton Unbearable. And the idea was he was going to meet the different press representatives and the NBC affiliates so they could see who their next big deal star was going to be. And Eric showed up looking nice, and I could tell there was already a little bit of a hum going on of all of the people whispering about him. So we get him down to the little holding area, and the NBC executives say, "Okay, put on your Chips uniform." And he said, "I'm not going to put it on. I'm wearing my street clothes." And they said, "No, you have to help promote the show." And he said, "Well, would you expect William Shatner to put on his Star Trek uniform?" And they went, "Yes." So Larry Wilcox walked in. He was wearing his outfit, to be a Chips guy. And they said, "Well, we can just send Larry out without you." And he put on his Chips outfit, and he was, or uniform. I shouldn't say outfit, his Chips uniform. And there's that famous shot of Donald Trump when he's going down the escalator when he's announcing that he was going to run for president. And Eric did the same thing where the escalator went down, and I just heard little girlies start screaming, and they were clamoring for autographs. And I was like, oh, this guy's going to be a big star. Okay.
Yeah. There's something, and we don't know what it is, but we know it when we see it. I remember being a little kid. We were going to go visit my dad's friend in Tennessee. And as we were walking into Tennessee in the airport, Johnny Cash turned the corner. I'm a little kid. I don't know who Johnny Cash is. And he's on his way by us. And it was like, whoa, what happened? It's like I was struck by lightning. I'm a little kid. I don't know anything about Johnny Cash. And then a couple hours later, he's ringside when Muhammad Ali's fighting Leon Spinks. And my dad's like, that's the guy you saw in the airport.
Wow.
I was like, I love Johnny Cash forever. Like, just, and so it just doesn't matter. You just, when you see it, there it is. And you just get hit by it. Did you ever meet Johnny Cash?
Jim McDonald, one of my page pals, worked on a show that Johnny Cash was working on. It was a variety show, and had an incredible moment with Johnny Cash. One of the things that we pages are told, as well as anybody else, is you never interrupt a show in the middle of a taping. Because if they have to stop taping and reset the cameras, and time is money, you just don't barge in anywhere. Well, Jim got a phone call in the hallway, and it was the governor of Utah. And he said, Gary Gilmore would like to speak to Johnny Cash.
Wow.
And this was on the day he was to be executed.
Last request style. Wow. Oh, man.
So Jim runs into the studio, stop the tape, and whispers in Johnny's ear. And Johnny sets his guitar down and walks out and talks to Gary Gilmore for about 45 minutes. And it turns out that Johnny had talked to him before and that they'd been praying together. And Johnny goes back into the studio, starts taping, but everybody stopped when they knew it was the designated time that Gary was being executed. So that's the Johnny Cash story.
I know what day that happened.
Oh,
it
yeah?
was on January 17th because it happened on my birthday.
Wow.
Yeah. There you go. We go full circle around here.
Well, that's what you find out with my book is there's a very, very weird thing that happened. And I was able to call my publisher, Bear Manor Media, and I just said, stop the presses. Something extraordinary just happened, and I have to include it in the book. Wow, and it was a real full circle moment because I don't know about you, but sometimes I do things and I wonder, am I just blowing smoke up my own skirt here? Is there really any value to what I'm doing? You know, with the book, I'm thinking maybe I should just, you know, put it in a flash drive and put it in a drawer for generations to come to find. And then this thing happened. And it kind of reassured me that, yes, the book needs to be published. People will enjoy it. And I can just a little bit say I'm thanking Harry Chapin for that moment also.
I love it.
How's that for a tease?
That's a good one. I love it. I love it. Okay. One Johnny Carson story, and then we're going to wrap this thing up and start our weekend.
Oh, okay. Gosh, just to pick one? Okay. Whenever he would arrive at the studio, it would usually be about 1:40 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we would just happen to have our tours waiting there. And Johnny would get out of his Corvette. And at one time he had a license plate that said 360 Guy. And he swears that it wasn't one of those custom license plates all around Guy, 360 Guy. But the people that were on the tour, I think, were so shocked to see Johnny in person. And he would arrive and he'd just be wearing like a golf shirt and tucked in pants. And he was very trim. It looked really good. And he would usually, you know, say something like the tour is a ripoff or, you know, something like that before he'd go in. But a lot of people didn't realize that Johnny's day didn't start at 2 o'clock. He was reading 3 newspapers. He was talking on the phone to Fred de Cordova. They were talking to the writers saying, you know, there's a joke about a whale today that we could do that's off the coast, or our air traffic controllers, or Jimmy Carter, whatever it was. So that by the time he was at the studio, he had about 50 different jokes to choose from, and he would lay out the monologue accordingly. And then once the studio was locked down and no more tours could come in, if Johnny was rehearsing like a Mighty Carson Art Player sketch or Tea Time Matinee, he was like so focused on doing it right. He wasn't like goofing off. He was respecting the writers. He was respecting the actors he was working with. And at 7:10, when the show got done taping, he was out the door.
Yeah. Straight pro. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, listen, this is great. I love these kind of stories. I love hearing. But one of the things that people don't realize is there's so many ways to make money in this industry. You don't have to be Johnny Carson. You can be a writer. You can be someone that plays the other horn in the band on The Tonight Show and have an entire career and buy a beautiful house in Burbank and raise kids and send them to USC. I mean, it's amazing. If you have the passion to do that, you really, really, really can do it, and it's incredible. It's an incredible thing, and I'm so glad that you wrote this book, and I can't wait to read it.
I hope that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed writing it.
Yes. All right. Good. Well, and hopefully we get a chance to do something else together because it's been a great time knowing you. Let's start our weekends. I'm going to roll these credits. If you want to chat for a minute afterwards, hang around. If not, I'll talk to you next time. Here we go. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by your